Okay, hello again. Here's my second volume of the Correspondence of Sir Ernest Satow, British Envoy in China, 1900 to 1906. And volume 2 and volume 3 are letters from consulates, Chinese consulates or consulates in China, British consulates in China. This volume volume 2 has an introduction by Andrew Hillier, which is intended for both volumes 2 and 3, the volumes about the consulates, or volumes of letters from consular staff. Okay, so I'm going to read Andrew's introduction now. First, it starts with a quotation. You see that the consular service is not brilliant. There are some first-rate men like C.W. Campbell, James Scott, Hosey, Fraser, Young Mayers, and Barton, good men like Warren, Mansfield, and Fulford. The rest are either mediocre or below mediocrity. And when I have to put a man in charge of a difficult post, I am often at a loss. This is written by Satow himself. It's from PRO 30/33 14/14, one of his letter books, letter number 12, dated 12th of February 1904, to Harding in the Foreign Office. And you can find that in the semi-official letters of British Envoy Sir Ernest Satow from Japan and China, which I've already introduced in another video. So Satow's semi-official letters are all in another video, those for Japan and China. Okay, so right, so Satow's saying that the consular service is not brilliant. And then I'll read on. When Sir Ernest Satow took up his appointment as Britain's minister in Peking in October 1900, there were some 30 consular establishments in China's treaty ports. 5 had been added in the previous 5 years, and 5 more would be opened during the following 6 years when he was in post. Kongmun in the West River Delta, Changsha, south of Yocho on the Xiang River, Sinan in Shantung, Mukden in Manchuria, and Chengdu in Sichuan. So you can refer to P.D. Coates, The China Consuls, Oxford University Press, 1988, for all this information. Whilst there would be the usual teething problems, and Kongmun would prove, in Coates's words, an utter failure, this further expansion into China's remoter regions shows that, at the turn of the century, Britain's imperial ambitions in East and Southeast Asia showed no signs of diminishing. The impression is powerfully reinforced by the consular correspondence to be found in these 2 volumes, volumes 2 and 3, fragmented though it is. By the way, I should show you my copy of P.D. Coates, The China Consuls, first published in 1988. I bought this from Britain. I had it sent to me from the UK. So there we are. It's a very detailed book about the Chinese consular service, the British one. All right, so let's carry on with Andrew Hillier's introduction. Drawn from the PRO, that's Public Record Office, files of Satow's private papers, it is the official nature of these letters which gives them their special character, enabling us to see what these officials wanted to say but did not wish to have placed on the record, either because in terms of public affairs it was over-speculative or insufficiently discreet, or because in respect of private matters it was confidential. Given that so few letters of this kind were kept by other British ministers, this collection provides an exceptional opportunity to focus on the mindset of this highly diverse set of officials whose working lives, in Coates's words, were spent in alien surroundings far from home, on what motivated them, what frustrated them, and how they behaved and kept going in what often were the most abnormal conditions. It also shows the vast range of issues with which Satow, as the British minister, had to deal on both a public and a private level. Few of his replies have survived for the obvious reason that they were not kept by the recipient, and generally no copies were made or kept at the legation. Save for the occasional annotation at the start of a letter, we have to imply what the response may have contained, although some assistance can be gained from the counterpart correspondence which Satow had with the Foreign Office and also from his diaries. So again, the semi-official letters which I have published and the diaries which I have published. Together with those sources, it is possible to draw a number of conclusions about the relationship between the minister and his consular staff. First, Satow was conscientious, if cerebral, and as is clear from the quotation at the start of this introduction, he did not suffer fools gladly. He therefore kept a careful eye on what was going on throughout the network of treaty ports, requiring not just official accounts, which could be passed on to London, but also more nuanced and at times speculative insights into what was going on beneath the surface. Secondly, and as a result of this approach, the consuls provided Satow with their own assessments of what was taking place in the wider geopolitical context, as well as reports of their consular work and day-to-day relationships with local Chinese officials. Thirdly, by Satow's time, the minister presided over a substantial body of consular staff, some of whom, such as Pelham Warren, appointed 1867, R.W. Mansfield, G.M. Playfair, and W. Holland, had been in post for over 30 years. Others, however, had only recently completed their first 2 years as student interpreters, and some of these were still in Peking when Satow arrived. Of the 20 we see in the photograph, there is a photograph on the previous page, which I should show you actually. Whoops, there it is. There are 20 in this photograph. Of the 20 we see in the photograph, taken just before the siege of the legations, 16 are mentioned in these letters, 9 of whom would eventually achieve consular status. Having survived that ordeal, many of these young men were self-confident, if a little brash. Although Satow was seen by some as a dry and impersonal figure, the letters suggest that, through his mastery of detail and the integrity which he showed towards his staff, he inspired considerable loyalty in many of them, and sometimes even affection. There is a footnote here, by the way. Warren had been killed in the siege. This is one of the student interpreters. And Townsend, who had been wounded, died shortly after it ended. Peachy resigned and Hancock died at about the time Satow was appointed. So, yeah, they didn't all survive. What's that, 5? 5 either died or resigned. The geopolitics of the region were dominated by Russian and Japanese rivalry in Manchuria, which culminated in the war, in which Russia suffered a crushing defeat. Although Britain remained neutral, it was deeply interested in the outcome, and Satow ensured he remained well informed about the build-up to hostilities and then about the conflict itself. See, for example, this is a footnote, see, for example, the correspondence from P.E. O'Brien Butler at Chifu, beginning October 16th, 1903, which is in this volume, PRO 30/33/8/4, letter number 4. When the war broke out, the British community in New Chuang were potentially in the firing line. And after Fulford had advised all Britons to leave the treaty port, Satow invited his wife and young daughter, Margaret, to Peking to lodge with him. They stayed a month, and it is clear from Fulford's follow-up letters that they all got on well, an insight which only private correspondence of this nature can provide. Alongside Russo-Japanese quest for territory, the consuls reported on German moves to extend its influence not only in Shandong, but also in the Yangtze Basin, and on France's designs in Yunnan, particularly in relation to the Sino-Burmese border and Southeast Asia generally. Throughout, Britain's aim was to maintain its position as the supreme power, whilst at the same time maintaining China's territorial integrity. Railway building was an essential part of this strategy, and as China sought to assert its autonomy, so rival Western consortia backed by their national governments, vied for the potentially lucrative franchises in what became a new type of railway imperialism. To maintain Britain's dominant position, this involved detailed discussions between consuls and senior Chinese officials, notably Chan Chi-tung, the viceroy. Although these were occasionally fraught, the correspondence indicates that, by and large, Sino-Japanese relations were conducted in a reasonably amicable fashion. Levies to fund the Boxer indemnity were in the process of being collected, and still reeling from the uprising, many officials wished to distance themselves from what had taken place. The impression is that with most consuls, unlike Satow himself, being proficient in Chinese, save for the occasional protocol standoff, interviews, although always formal, were constructive. However, there is also a sense that in this post-Boxer world, there was less interest in the Chinese people and its culture, certainly subject to a few exceptions amongst the new generation of consular officials by comparison with those in the past, men like Wade, Mayers, and Walter Hillier. And of those still in post, Playfair, Hopkins, Hosey, and Clennell, whose approach was informed by a degree of cultural sensitivity. Footnote, see Andrew Hillier, Bridging Cultures, the Forging of the China Consular Mind, in the Journal of Imperial and Commonwealth History, 47, 2019, pages 742 to 772, especially pages 763 to 4. Whilst the new men were keen to travel and botanize, one of Satow's favorite pastimes, their interest in China may have been tainted by what they had witnessed during the siege, the death of colleagues, and the hardships suffered by women and children. In the main, they saw themselves now as diligent civil servants carrying out their duties in an alien land. One exception was perhaps in respect of those assigned to Yunnan, a beautiful and fascinating province with a rich, if bewildering, range of indigenous people, often referred to collectively as the Shans. It was also an area where Britain was keen to outwit French influence by building a railway connecting Burma and China, an idea stretching back to the 1870s when Augustus Margery was murdered on his way to escort a military mapping team across the border. However, despite the importance of these new consular outposts, the accommodation was often totally unsatisfactory, the consul at the border treaty port of Tengyue, G.J.L. Lytton, being badly housed in a rickety, dark, and leaking shanty. That's a quotation from one of the letters. One of the most outstanding of the young consuls, he was already in poor health, partly because of these unsanitary conditions, and would die 2 years later. So really, it was quite a tough place to work and to be posted, China, as so many of them actually died. Much of the correspondence is taken up with the development of trade and managing relations with the local customs commissioner, a task which was not always easy, given the intransigence and vagaries of the long-standing Inspector General, Sir Robert Hart. There were also issues relating to the administration of justice, including the macabre question of how to hang a convicted murderer in the Canton consulate without causing offense to the Western women living nearby. However, it is the personal element in the letters that comes through most strongly, because it was in this correspondence that Satow and the small body of legation staff, notably the excellent C.W. Campbell as Chinese secretary, assisted him, effectively performed the functions of a modern human resources department. There were persistent complaints by consuls or acting consuls that they had been passed over for promotion in favor of some more junior officer. Mansfield, to whom Satow had promised the consul generalship at Canton, being so aggrieved that he took the matter to the Foreign Office, but without success. Many complained of sickness and long-term debility and sought long leave or early retirement. Playfair feared that his health would give out if he took the Canadian Pacific Railway home, whilst Pelham Warren states, "On the whole, I am better than I was last summer and can struggle through another. I find Fraser quite prostrated by fever, and the doctor says he ought to get away at once." Sadly for E.D.H. Fraser, the advised rest at Cooling did not pay off, and on the 26th of September 1905, he wrote to Satow telling him that 3 of his children had suddenly fallen ill of cholera infantum, and his younger daughter had just died of it. My wife is prostrate with grief and exhaustion, and we are still anxious about the two boys, though today things look a little hopeful. Fortunately, the two boys did survive, but this tragedy will have marked both parents for life. There were endless requests for compassionate leave by Brady, who was himself suffering from ill health and whose father was over 80 and dying, from Hosey, whose wife was dying of cancer in England, and who, having finally got to England, wrote the most personal of letters about being able to spend the final days with his wife before she died. It is not only the news itself, but the way it had to be sandwiched between other more mundane matters, particularly the official's next posting and travel arrangements, which makes these letters so moving even today. And whilst Coates has lamented the lack of reference to wives and children in the official correspondence, it is ironically these volumes, compiled from the papers of such a seemingly cerebral man, Satow, which provide the exception and a powerful lens through which to glimpse the intimate life of the consular world. This intimacy also extended to more unsavory matters. At least two consular officials were known to be opium addicts. According to Brady, no one wanted Mackinnon on their staff. His reputation in Foochow is so utterly evil that for the credit of the consulate, as well as for my own peace of mind, I felt it only right to ask you to be good enough to reconsider your determination. Eventually, he was required to resign. E.F. Bennett, I don't think it's E.S., I think it's E.F. Bennett. E.S. was not appointed until 1912, according to Coates, page 534. Anyway, let's say E.F. Bennett was equally unwelcome and was persuaded to retire on grounds of ill health. All of these problems had to be managed, a number of them against the backdrop of new consulates where accommodation was often far from satisfactory, and little, if any, thought had been given to how the incoming consul might establish himself. The tone varies from the respectful but distant to the respectful but exasperated, and also, as we have seen, to one which is at times much more personal. In this respect, by far the most striking are the letters sent by C.A.W. Archibald Rose, pictured sitting in the center of the photograph which I showed you earlier, who seems to have been one of the few to have developed a more intimate relationship with Satow. No one else signed off their letters goodbye and would not, I think, have been encouraged to do so. And when it came to bidding his chief a final farewell, Rose could not hold back. The letter, which needs to be quoted at length to do justice to the writer and to the recipient, is a fitting note on which to end this introduction to a minister who was clearly an exceptional and charismatic figure. So Rose writes, "My dear Sir Ernest, you are well away from China by this time, possibly at home, but I am writing, though it is so late, to say goodbye. You will probably be glad to leave the constant struggle of Peking, but I hope that you will find a hunting ground where life has a few more comforts, though it will be difficult to give it more or wider interests than China has offered during your 5 years. It seems so long when one looks back to the bitter, dusty day that you arrived from Tungchou, that's southeast Peking, and came into your bleak legation, and to the day when you took over charge. I seem to have grown up so much since then, and it is years and years ago, as I look back on what Herbert Deering would describe as the flippity-gibbet days, I wonder how you have felt as you left the East behind. It must have been with many keen regrets, for the years have been so full and so many people and places must have built themselves into your life. I can tell you now that you have gone, of the great personal sorrow that your departure is to me. You were my first chief. That perhaps is partly the reason. More than that, however, I realize now how much my life was molded by you when it was just beginning, so that your influence will surely stay with me always now. I will try to be a good disciple and to do my work in the world worthily and as you would wish. In the old hard-worked days in Peking, we all seemed so near to one another, and I believe that we were all fighting and using our every energy so that life became very earnest and sincere. I look back always to the time with great happiness, and whatever may come afterwards, that will always be the beginning of life for me, with all its freshness and its vivid impressions. It is useless to thank you for the interest that you have shown in my life and my world since I left you. Your occasional letters have made such a difference, and they have spurred me on to try and make the best of my life. Now that you have left, I do wish with all my heart that you may be happy and well. You will know that you have made, for the most reckless of your people, a life of deeper and fuller meaning, and that you leave for me a memory of great affection. Goodbye, dear Sir Ernest, and every good wish go with you always. I shall hope that we may someday meet again, and that until then we may be truly absent friends. Yours ever, Archibald Rose. And he adds a PS. If you should have a photograph that you can spare, I should value one very much. This is from PRO 303384, letter number 28, Archibald Rose to Satow, handwritten from the British consulate in Chifu, June the 6th, 1906. And that is the end of Andrew Hillier's introduction to volumes 2 and 3 of the correspondence of Sir Ernest Satow, British envoy in China. I'll just show it to you one more time. There we are. That's volume 2. This is the paperback, but don't forget there's also hardcover and in fact Kindle as well. So thank you very much for listening and perhaps watching, and I will see you again soon. Thank you.